I looked my only son straight in the eye and asked, "Danny, when will your wedding be?" He lowered his gaze and Jessica smirked. Her words sliced through me like a blade. "Oh, we already got married yesterday. We only invited special people." Special people. 3 years of paying their rent, buying their furniture, filling their fridge when they had nothing, and I wasn't special. My pale pink dress still hangs in the closet, tags intact, never worn for the photographs I imagined. I had set aside $1,000 as a wedding gift, scrubbed my home to shine, called my sister with the good news. But in one instant, with 4 poisoned words, it all collapsed. I froze in my own living room while Jessica sprawled across the sofa I bought for them, sipping wine from glasses I had paid for. Danny's silence was louder than any insult. My heart hammered, my chest burned, and for the first time in my 71 years, I understood the cruel truth. I wasn't a mother anymore. I was an ATM with feelings. Do you know what betrayal tastes like? It is bitter, metallic, and unforgettable. They stripped me not only of dignity, but of my place in the story of my son's life. And that day, something inside me snapped. Like this video if you've ever been cut out by the people you loved most. Subscribe for more stories where truth shatters illusions. And leave a comment right now. Tell me, if your own child looked you in the eye and said you weren't special, what would you do? My name is Margaret Wilson, though most people call me Maggie. I am 71 years old, a retired secretary, and for most of my life I believed my purpose was clear: to raise my son Danny and give him the stability I never had. I grew up in a small town where people knew each other's secrets, but no one ever offered help. My father drank, my mother worked double shifts at the diner, and I learned early on that survival depended on resilience. When I married Robert Wilson at 23, I thought I had finally found safety. He was kind, hard-working, and for 15 years he gave me a life I never dreamed possible. Then cancer came like a thief in the night and stole him away before he turned 40. Danny was just 10 years old when Robert passed. I remember standing at the graveside, gripping his small hand in mine, promising him through my tears that he would never feel abandoned. I would carry both the roles of mother and father. I would protect him, feed him, clothe him, and never let him fall. That vow shaped the rest of my life. Every extra hour I worked, every dollar I saved, every dream I postponed, it was all for Danny. I never remarried. Men came and went, polite acquaintances from church or neighbours who offered kind smiles, but I always declined. My heart was buried with Robert, and my energy was consumed by Danny. I told myself I didn't need companionship because my son was enough. When Danny graduated high school, I was the loudest one in the bleachers, clapping until my hands hurt. When he moved into his first apartment, I was there with pots, pans, and the quilt my mother had stitched decades earlier. People often warned me, "Maggie, don't give too much. Children need to learn responsibility." I nodded politely, but in my heart, I believed love was measured by sacrifice. If I gave Danny everything, surely he would understand my devotion. Surely he would love me back with the same intensity. I worked for 40 years at the same insurance office, never once calling in sick unless I had no choice, saving every penny. I dreamed not of vacations or luxuries, but of handing Danny a future free of struggle. When he met Jessica Carter, I tried to be supportive. She was young, ambitious, and her smile had a way of filling a room. At first I thought she might be the partner who would steady Danny's life. I welcomed her with open arms, cooked her favourite meals, even slipped her small gifts, perfume, handbags, little signs that I wanted her to feel part of our family. I believed generosity was the bridge to acceptance. But slowly, cracks appeared. Danny stopped visiting just to talk. Every call became a request: help with rent, help with groceries, help with emergencies that never seemed to end. Jessica's voice was sweet when she asked, almost musical, but it carried the weight of expectation. "Maggie, you're like a second mom to me," she would say, sliding her hand over mine. "We just need a little help this month." And I always gave in, convincing myself it was temporary, that they just needed time to stand on their own. I drained my savings account bit by bit, telling myself Robert would have wanted this. I cut back on my own expenses, skipping hair appointments, ignoring the leaking faucet in my kitchen, wearing shoes until the soles thinned, all so that Danny and Jessica could build their lives without burden. Friends noticed my sacrifices. "Maggie," they whispered, "you're too generous. They'll take advantage of you." But I silenced their concerns. I couldn't bear the thought that my only son might see me as anything less than indispensable. Every night I sat at the small dining table in my modest house, writing checks, transferring funds online, balancing numbers that always tilted in their favour. I told myself this was love in action. I told myself one day Danny would look at me with gratitude shining in his eyes, that he would say, "Mom, you gave me everything, and I will never forget it." I clung to that hope with the stubbornness of a woman who had already lost too much. Because to admit otherwise, to admit that maybe my sacrifices were invisible, would have been unbearable. I defined myself as a mother who gave without limits, and in that identity I believed I was safe. When I think back to the early years with Danny, what comes first are the small quiet moments that stitched our lives together. Saturday mornings, when he was little, we would walk down to the corner bakery, his small hand gripping mine, his eyes wide at the rows of glazed donuts. I always bought him the chocolate one with sprinkles, even when money was tight. I would skip my own treat just to see the joy on his face as he bit into that sugary circle. Those mornings felt like proof that I could still give him happiness, even when Robert's absence left an ache in both our lives. I remember his laughter echoing through the park as he chased pigeons, his skinny legs pumping, his cheeks flushed with life. When he stumbled and scraped his knee, he would run back to me, tears threatening, but I would kiss the wound and whisper, "You're stronger than you think." He would nod bravely, wipe his eyes, and run off again. To me, he was everything, my child, my hope, my reason to endure. Birthdays were always special. I baked cakes from scratch, sometimes lopsided, sometimes burnt at the edges, but always decorated with care. On his 12th birthday, I saved for months to buy him a used bicycle. The look on his face when he saw it, a mix of disbelief and joy, was worth every overtime shift I had taken. He rode that bike until the tyres wore down to threads. Every scrape on its frame was a story of freedom, a memory of a boy who still believed his mother could do anything. Christmas was a mixture of magic and exhaustion. I worked late into the night wrapping gifts in bright paper, even if each gift had been bought second-hand or on clearance. I wanted the tree to shine with the promise of abundance, even when our bank account said otherwise. Danny would wake up at dawn, shaking me awake, his excitement contagious. We would sit in our pajamas on the living room floor, ripping paper, laughing, pretending that the world was kinder than it really was. Those mornings were my sanctuary. When Danny became a teenager, life grew more complicated. He was taller, his voice deeper, his questions sharper. He asked about his father, about why life felt so unfair. I told him stories about Robert, his patience, his humour, his hard work. I tried to fill the gaps with words, even though I knew they were poor substitutes for the man himself. Sometimes Danny would hug me tight after those stories, and I would feel the weight of his love pressing into my ribs. Those hugs carried me through sleepless nights and endless bills. High school brought new challenges, uniforms to buy, school trips to pay for, sports fees I could barely cover. I took on cleaning jobs on weekends, scrubbing other people's kitchens until my hands cracked, just so Danny could play basketball with his friends or join the debate team. When I watched him step onto the court, when I heard his voice ring out in competitions, pride swelled in me like a tide. No one in the stands knew the sacrifices behind his victories, but I did, and that was enough. There were moments when he showed me tenderness that reminded me why I gave so much. Once, on Mother's Day, he made me breakfast in bed, burnt toast and watery orange juice. He placed it on a tray with a single flower he had picked from the yard. "You're the best, Mom," he said shyly. I pretended the toast was delicious and swallowed every bite with gratitude. That morning, I believed that no matter what, my son's love would never falter. Looking back, those memories shine like fragile glass ornaments, beautiful but breakable. They built the foundation of my faith in him, the reason I never questioned my sacrifices later. I told myself over and over that the boy who once held my hand so tightly, who once whispered that I was the best mother, would never abandon me. Those memories were my armour, my justification for pouring out every dollar, every ounce of energy, every piece of myself. I believed with the certainty of a mother's heart that love bought through sacrifice was love secured forever. It began with whispers, tiny fractures in the rhythm of our lives that I chose to ignore. At first, I convinced myself I was imagining things, that old age was making me overly sensitive, but the signs multiplied until they could no longer be brushed aside. Danny's phone calls became shorter, stripped of warmth, where he once lingered to ask how I was sleeping or whether my knees still ached in the cold. Now he cut straight to the chase. "Mom, the rent's due. Can you transfer it today?" Or, "Jess's car broke down. We'll need at least $400. The affection that had once framed his words vanished, leaving behind only transactions. Jessica's smile changed too. In the early days, she had charmed me, complimenting my cooking, asking about Robert, feigning interest in family photo albums. Now her compliments turned brittle, sharp around the edges. "Maggie, you're so generous," she would purr, but her eyes gleamed with calculation, as if generosity was a faucet she could twist on and off at will. I noticed the way they whispered to each other when they thought I wasn't listening, quick glances exchanged, small smirks that left me unsettled. Once, as I entered their apartment with groceries, I caught Jessica rolling her eyes at Danny. The silence that followed was louder than any words. When I asked what they had been talking about, Danny mumbled something about work stress, avoiding my gaze. The worst was the wedding planning, or what I believed was wedding planning. For months I had been told vague details. "We're keeping it simple," Jessica insisted. "Just a few close people." I offered to help with expenses, and they accepted without hesitation. Dresses, flowers, deposits for venues. They let me shoulder every burden, nodding with gratitude that felt rehearsed. I began to suspect something when Jessica mentioned her parents' excitement. "They can't wait," she said, smiling faintly. "They're already shopping for outfits." The words stung because I hadn't been given the same updates. Whenever I asked about dates or invitations, the answers were vague. "We're still deciding. We'll let you know soon." My stomach tightened with unease. At night, lying in bed, I replayed conversations in my mind, trying to catch the slivers of truth between their lines. Why did Jessica's family know more than I did? Why was I always kept in the shadows? I dismissed it as paranoia, as the loneliness of a widow craving inclusion. Still, the unease gnawed at me. Then came the first deliberate wound. I asked Danny gently, "Sweetheart, do you know when you'll set the date?" He shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting away. Jessica's voice sliced the air. "Oh, we already got married yesterday. We only invited special people." The words detonated inside me. Special people. My knees nearly buckled, my chest constricted. I had imagined myself at that altar, dressed in pale pink, smiling through tears as my son said his vows. I had scrubbed my home for guests, set aside $1,000 as a gift, planned every detail of my outfit, and now, in a casual sentence, it was erased. I tried to meet Danny's eyes, but he looked at the floor, shame flickering across his face. Jessica reclined smugly on the sofa I had bought, her smirk daring me to protest. Rage boiled within me, but it was drowned out by something heavier: humiliation. My place in my son's life had been erased by the woman who now held his loyalty. I forced myself to breathe, to stand tall despite the trembling in my hands. "Why?" I whispered. Danny muttered, "It was intimate, Mom, just us and the witnesses." But the lie was transparent. Within hours I saw the truth plastered across social media. Photos of Jessica's parents, her siblings clinking champagne, her radiant white dress that my money had helped buy. That night, I sat alone at my kitchen table, the glow of my phone illuminating pictures I was never meant to see. My throat tightened as I scrolled through the images. My son stood in the frame, grinning beside Jessica's family, a champagne flute in hand. I had never felt so small, so discarded. Still, part of me clung to denial. Perhaps they had panicked. Perhaps they thought excluding me was for the best, to spare me travel or stress. I told myself a dozen stories to soften the blow, but the seed of suspicion had been planted, and it began to grow in dark corners of my heart. The next week, the phone rang. Jessica's voice, trembling now, pleaded, "Maggie, the rent's overdue. The landlord says he'll kick us out. You forgot to transfer the money." Her desperation was palpable, but I felt no pity. Instead, her words echoed hollow in my ears. "Forgotten?" As if it were my obligation to keep them afloat. I remembered every sacrifice, beans and rice for my own meals so they could eat steak, cancelled outings with friends so I could pay their bills, years of scrimping so they could indulge. My chest burned with fury. And in that moment a phrase escaped my lips with icy calm. Didn't I warn you? I only help special people. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear Jessica's breathing, ragged and panicked. For once, it was she who trembled, not me. Maggie, I don't understand, she stammered. You've always said we were special to you. Lies, wrapped in honey. I saw through them now. Her words were no longer music, but chains, binding me to endless giving. My heart pounded with clarity. I had been reduced to a wallet, my love measured in transactions. That night, as tears blurred my vision, I wasn't mourning their cruelty, I was mourning my blindness. For years I had excused the small slights, overlooked the dismissive glances, forgiven the constant requests. Now I saw the pattern with brutal clarity. The signs had always been there, the whispers, the smirks, the secrets. And as I lay in bed, sleepless and aching, I understood the chilling truth. My son and his wife were not simply careless. They were preparing for a future where I was nothing more than an account to drain. The small fractures had widened into a canyon, and I stood on the edge, staring into a darkness I could no longer deny. I woke the next morning with an ache in my chest that no amount of coffee could soften. The betrayal from the wedding festered like an untreated wound. For the first time in years, I stopped thinking about Danny's needs before my own. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table with a notebook, pen, and a stack of bank statements. If Jessica wanted to call me selfish, if Danny wanted to call me confused, then I would see for myself just how far my so-called generosity had gone. I began to write: monthly rent, $500. Multiply that by 36 months, $18,000. Food and groceries, $200 a month. Another $7,200. Birthday gifts, Christmas gifts, anniversaries, at least $3,000. Jessica's medical emergencies, $800. The car loan I covered, $2,500. The air conditioner repair in their apartment, $600. The living room furniture I bought outright, $1,200. When the ink stopped moving, the total stared back at me in bold numbers, $33,400. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. $33,400. The inheritance Robert had left for me to live out my days in dignity. The pension I had carefully saved from 4 decades of honest work. All of it siphoned away to keep 2 adults comfortable, 2 adults who had looked me in the eye and deemed me unworthy of a place at their wedding. My hands shook as I touched the page. I had never seen the truth spelled out so clearly. Each number was a knife, each line a scar. For years I told myself it wasn't so much, just a few hundred here, a few thousand there. But when gathered together, the scale of my blindness was undeniable. The phone buzzed. Danny's name glowed on the screen. Once, that name would have sent my heart soaring, eager for his voice. Now it filled me with dread. I let it ring. He called again. Then Jessica. Then both, alternating like vultures circling. I turned the phone face down and forced myself to breathe. Memories clashed in my mind. Danny as a boy, hugging me tight after scraping his knee, telling me I was the best mom. Danny as a man, sitting silent while Jessica smirked about special people. The dissonance was unbearable. Which version was real? Was the child an illusion? Or had the man grown into someone I no longer recognized? I walked to the mirror in the bathroom. The face that looked back at me was lined with years of exhaustion. The same wrinkles, the same tired eyes, but something new simmered beneath them. Hardness. A spark of defiance I hadn't seen in decades. I pressed my palms to the counter and whispered, "Enough." That day, I drove to the bank. The manager, George Klein, had known me for years. He had processed every transfer, every automatic payment I set up for Danny and Jessica. When I told him I wanted to cancel everything, his brows lifted in shock. "Mrs. Wilson, are you sure?" he asked gently. "These transfers have been consistent for 3 years. What happened," I said, voice firm, "is that I finally opened my eyes. Cancel them all, and show me how to protect my accounts so no one else has access." His concern was genuine, more genuine than my own son's had been in years. As he worked, my phone buzzed relentlessly in my purse. I turned it off, savouring the silence that followed. When George handed me the confirmation papers, I felt lighter, as if I had set down a burden I had carried too long. For the first time in years, my money was mine, my life was mine. But the relief didn't last. That evening, as I walked back into my home, I noticed 3 cars parked outside, Danny's, Jessica's, and one unfamiliar. My pulse quickened. Inside, I found them waiting, along with a man in a grey suit rifling through my documents on the dining table. "What is happening here?" I demanded. Jessica's voice was syrupy, desperate. "Maggie, thank God you're here. This is Mr. Fisher, a family attorney. We're worried about you." My eyes narrowed. "Worried about me? Or about your bank account?" Danny lifted his head, his face pale. "Mom, you cancelled the transfers. You're not answering calls. This isn't like you. We think you need help." Mr. Fisher extended a hand I refused to shake. "Mrs. Wilson, your children are concerned about your mental well-being. They've asked me to evaluate whether guardianship might be appropriate." Guardianship. The word reverberated through me like a gunshot. They wanted control of my life. They wanted to strip me of autonomy, to reduce me to a legal puppet so they could access my accounts at will. Rage surged, hot and electric. "These are my private papers," I snapped, snatching them from the table. "You have no right to look at them. And you," I turned to Danny, "dare to bring a stranger into my home to question my sanity? After everything I've done for you?" Jessica reached for my hand, feigning tenderness. "Maggie, honey, loneliness can play tricks on the mind. At your age, confusion is normal." Confusion. That single word stripped away the last veil of illusion. They weren't here to help me, they were here to declare me incompetent. The boy I had raised alone was now a 35-year-old man plotting to rob me of my dignity. I straightened my shoulders, my voice sharp as glass. "I am not confused. I am clearer than I've ever been. And you are going to leave my house right now." Mr. Fisher's smile faltered, but his words were rehearsed. "Mrs. Wilson, your family has rights. If they believe your judgment is impaired, a court can assign guardianship." I laughed, bitter and hollow. Impaired judgment? For finally deciding my money belongs to me? For refusing to bankroll 2 adults who treat me like garbage? No, Mr. Fisher, the only impaired judgment here is believing I'll hand over my freedom without a fight. Jessica's mask cracked, anger flashing in her eyes. "Everything you have will belong to us one day anyway. We're just speeding up the process." There it was, the truth, raw and ugly. In their minds, I was already dead. I pointed to the door. "Out! All of you, get out of my house!" Danny's face twisted, childlike rage in his features. "Mom, we can't just leave. We have obligations. Rent, car payments, credit cards you co-signed. You can't cut us off overnight." My voice rose with steel I hadn't felt in years. "Who says I can't? For years, I paid rent on an apartment that wasn't mine. I filled a fridge in a home where I wasn't welcome. I financed a life that never had room for me. And now it ends." Mr. Fisher laid a folder on the table. "We've prepared documents, a power of attorney, temporary until you feel better." Without opening it, I tossed the folder into the trash. "The only transition happening here is yours, to the front door." They left with wounded dignity, Jessica's tears bitter with frustration, Danny's threats echoing behind him. "This will end badly for you. You'll be alone when you need us most." I closed the door and whispered to the empty house, "I am already alone. The difference is, now it's by choice." For the first time in years, the silence around me was not loneliness. It was freedom. The days that followed were a blur of ringing phones and unanswered messages. Every time I glanced at the screen, Danny's name or Jessica's appeared, relentless, as if they believed persistence could wear me down. I had spent 3 years jumping at their every call, rushing to the bank, rushing to the grocery store, rushing to sacrifice myself. Now, I let each ring fade into silence. The power in that simple act was intoxicating, but they didn't take the hint. 2 mornings later, I found Danny standing on my porch, his fists pounding on the door. When I opened it, he didn't greet me, didn't ask how I was. He stormed past me as if he still had the right. "Mom, what the hell are you doing?" he demanded, pacing the living room like a caged animal. "You can't just cut us off. Jessica and I have bills, rent, credit cards. You co-signed for half of it. You're ruining us." I closed the door behind him and leaned against it, arms folded. "Danny, I'm not ruining anyone. I'm just refusing to let you ruin me." He whirled around, his eyes flashing with something that wasn't sorrow, but rage. "Do you even hear yourself? Jess and I counted on you. We built our life with your help. You can't just pull the rug out from under us." Danny, I said slowly, choosing each word with care. You are 35 years old. You have 2 arms, 2 legs, and a mind of your own. If you can plan a wedding without me, if you can exclude me from your life, then you can figure out how to pay your own rent. His face twisted, a boy's pout on a man's body. This isn't you, Mom. Jessica says you've been acting different, cold, irrational. Are you sick? Did someone put ideas in your head? No one had to, I shot back. You and Jessica put the ideas there when you showed me exactly how little I mean to you. For a moment, I thought he might break, might show remorse, might reach for me with the tenderness of the boy I raised. Instead, his shoulders stiffened. If you don't help us, we'll lose everything. Do you want that on your conscience? The manipulation was sharp, but no longer effective. I stood taller. Losing everything you can't afford is not my burden. My conscience is clear. He slammed his hand against the back of the sofa I had bought for them, the sound reverberating through the room. You're making a mistake, Mom. A big one. Jessica and I, we're your family. You owe us. The word owe echoed in my head like a curse. Family, in his mouth, had become a debt collector's tool. I walked to the door, opened it wide and said, Then consider the debt paid. Now leave. His eyes darkened. He stepped close, so close I could smell the coffee on his breath. You're going to regret this, he hissed. Then he stormed out, slamming the door so hard the picture frames rattled on the walls. I sat down at the table, my hands trembling, but not from fear, from fury. My son had become a stranger, a man who saw me not as a mother but as a bank account with legs. Later that afternoon, Jessica called from a blocked number. I answered out of weary curiosity. Her voice was syrupy, the same false sweetness she used whenever she wanted something. Maggie, darling, we know you're upset. We made mistakes. But this can all be fixed if you just give us one more chance. Jessica, I cut her off. If you're calling to ask for money, the answer is no. If you're calling to tell me I'm confused or crazy, save your breath. And if you're calling because you think tears will change my mind, hang up now. There was silence, followed by a sharp exhale. Fine, she snapped. But don't think you can abandon us without consequences. You think you're strong, but you're just an old woman living alone. You need us more than we need you. I laughed, a harsh sound that surprised even me. Need you? Jessica, the only thing I needed was the truth, and you've given me that in spades. I ended the call. The very next day, the pressure intensified. A letter arrived in the mail, written in Danny's untidy scrawl. It wasn't an apology. It was a list. Overdue rent, overdue credit card bills, car payments. At the bottom, in bold ink, he had written, We expect you to cover this, like always. I stared at the page, my stomach knotting. He wasn't even asking anymore, he was demanding. I tore the letter in half, then again and again until the pieces fluttered into the trash. That evening, as the sun dipped low, headlights swept across my driveway. Their car. I watched from the window as Danny and Jessica sat inside, arguing. I could see Jessica's hands slicing the air, Danny's face red with frustration. They didn't come to the door this time. They just sat there for nearly an hour, as though their presence alone would bend me back into submission. I refused to budge. I drew the curtains and let them stew in their own desperation. But inside my heart ached, not with doubt. Never that again, but with grief. This was my only son, the child I had loved more fiercely than life itself. And here he was, parked outside my house like a predator, trying to reclaim control. The following week, the demands escalated. Jessica left voicemails dripping with venom. If you don't pay, we'll be evicted. The shame will be yours. Danny texted, Mom, I'm begging you. Don't do this. I'll never forgive you if we lose everything. Each message was a knife, but instead of cutting me down, they carved the truth deeper into my bones. My sacrifices had never been love. They had been leverage. I sat at my kitchen table once more, staring at the ledger I had written, each dollar accounted for, each sacrifice inked in black and white, $33,400, the price of 3 years of delusion. And now, with every phone call, every threat, every pounding on my door, I understood the reality. Danny and Jessica weren't asking anymore. They were demanding. They believed they were entitled to me, to my money, to my very life. But entitlement and love are not the same. And for the first time, I had the strength to say no. I turned off the phone, shut off the lights, and let the night wrap around me. Outside, their car idled. Inside, my resolve hardened like steel. They could beg, threaten, scream or sulk, but the faucet had been shut, and no matter what they did next, I would never turn it back on. I came home one afternoon to find the front door ajar. My breath caught, my pulse thundering in my ears. I had locked it that morning, of that I was certain. Slowly I pushed it open, my heart sinking as the creak echoed through the hallway. Inside, the air felt wrong, papers scattered across the dining table, my personal documents, bank statements, insurance papers, even Robert's will, were spread out like merchandise in a pawn shop. Danny sat slumped on the sofa, his head in his hands. Jessica paced back and forth, her heels clicking like a metronome of panic. And at the table, a man in a grey suit flipped through my life as if it belonged to him. What is happening here? My voice was louder than I intended, sharp enough to make them all freeze. Jessica turned first, feigning relief. Maggie, thank God you're here. This is Mr. Fisher, an attorney. We're just trying to help. Help? I stepped forward and snatched a stack of papers from the man's hands. These are my private documents. You have no right to touch them. Mr. Fisher smiled with practiced calm. Mrs. Wilson, I understand this feels invasive, but your children are worried. They've asked me to assess whether guardianship might be appropriate. The word burned like acid. Guardianship? You mean stripping me of control of my own life? Danny finally lifted his head. His eyes, once so full of innocence, now glistened with desperation. Mom, please, you're not acting like yourself. You cancelled the transfers, you won't answer calls. We just want to make sure you're okay. I stared at him, searching for a trace of the boy I had raised, but all I saw was a man who had learned to parrot Jessica's manipulations. What you want, I said evenly, is my money. Jessica's voice turned syrupy, the way it always did when she wanted something. Maggie, honey, loneliness can make people confused. At your age, it's normal. We're just trying to protect you. Confused. The word detonated inside me, louder than any insult. I stood straighter, steel in my spine. I am not confused. I am clearer than I have ever been, and you are going to leave my house right now. Mr. Fisher's expression didn't falter. Mrs. Wilson, if your judgment is impaired, the law allows your family to intervene. It would be temporary. A power of attorney. I cut him off, my voice like ice. The only impaired judgment here is yours, thinking I'll sign away my freedom. You can take your papers and get out. Jessica's mask cracked, her face twisting. Everything you have will belong to us one day anyway. We're just speeding up the process. The truth, naked and vile, hung in the air. Out, I said, pointing to the door. All of you. Now. Danny stood, his face twisted in childish anger. Mom, we can't just leave. We have obligations. Rent, car payments, credit cards. You co-signed. I don't care! My voice rose sharp and unyielding. For years I paid rent on a home that wasn't mine, filled a refrigerator in a house where I wasn't welcome, financed a life that excluded me. It ends now. Mr. Fisher placed a folder on the table, his tone still professional. Mrs. Wilson, this power of attorney will make things easier, just until you feel better. Without looking, I grabbed the folder and tossed it into the trash. The only transition happening here is you, to the front door. Jessica's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of frustration, not grief. You can't do this to us, Maggie. We were counting on you. Counting on my money, I replied. Not my love, not my well-being, just my money. They shuffled toward the door, their dignity in tatters. Before stepping out, Danny turned, his eyes blazing. This will end badly for you. You'll end up alone, with no one to care for you when you need it most. I held his gaze, my heart breaking but my voice steady. I am already alone, Danny. The difference is, now it's by choice. The door closed behind them and silence settled like a blessing. For the first time in years, it wasn't the silence of neglect, it was the silence of freedom. But the invasion left its mark. That night I walked from room to room, double-checking locks, touching the papers they had handled, feeling violated in my own home. I barely slept, every creak of the house pulling me upright in fear. The next morning I took action. At the hardware store I ordered new locks, heavy, solid, unbreakable. Frank Summers, the owner, nodded with quiet understanding. Changing them for your son? He asked softly. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. His son Ethan installed a security system, cameras on every angle of the house. While they worked, my phone buzzed non-stop. Calls from blocked numbers, voicemails filled with pleas and threats. I ignored them all. Later, a knock at the door startled me. When I checked the camera, I saw a woman I didn't recognize, neatly dressed, holding a folder. My stomach tightened. "Good morning, Mrs. Wilson," she said when I opened the door. "I'm Karen Schmidt, a social worker with the Office of Senior Services. We've received a report that you may be at risk. I need to conduct a wellness check." My blood ran cold. Danny and Jessica had escalated their game. I forced calm into my voice. "May I see your ID?" She showed it, official and genuine. Reluctantly, I let her in, though every instinct screamed against it. She sat in my living room, opening her folder. "We've been told you've shown erratic financial behaviour, cutting off support for your family, installing unnecessary security systems, refusing medical help." Each word was a dagger, carefully designed to paint me as unstable. I could practically hear Jessica's voice in the phrasing. I lifted my chin. "I want my lawyer here before I answer any questions." Karen frowned. "Ma'am, this is just a wellness check. If you have nothing to hide..." The phrase ignited my fury. If I have nothing to hide, that's exactly what abusers say before they trample your privacy. I will not answer without my lawyer. I called Tom Webber, and within 20 minutes he arrived, his presence solid as stone. His eyes hardened when he saw Karen. "Do you have a court order to be here?" he asked. She faltered. "No, we have reports from family members. The same family that tried to coerce her into signing a power of attorney?" Tom cut in. He dropped a folder on the table. "Here's documentation of $33,400 taken from her in 3 years. That's not concern, that's exploitation." Karen scanned the documents, her face paling. Finally, she closed her folder. "Mrs. Wilson, I see no indication you're at risk. I'll close this case." After she left, Tom turned to me. "This isn't over, Maggie. They're desperate, and desperate people do dangerous things." I nodded, the weight of his words pressing into me. My son and his wife had crossed a line from dependence into invasion, from manipulation into assault, and though fear coiled in my stomach, another force rose stronger. Resolve. They had taken my money, my trust, my peace, but they would not take my mind. They would not take my dignity. If they wanted a war, I would fight. And this time I would not fight with guilt or sacrifice. I would fight with every ounce of strength I had left. The confrontation that finally shattered the thin threads between us came on a stormy evening. Rain lashed the windows, thunder rolled in the distance, and I was sitting in the living room with a cup of tea when the pounding began at my front door. I checked the camera feed, Danny, Jessica, and that lawyer, Fisher. My stomach tightened, but I opened the door anyway. Danny pushed past me immediately, dripping water onto the carpet I had vacuumed that morning. Jessica followed with her chin high, Fisher trailing behind, briefcase in hand. They didn't ask to come in, they invaded, as if my home was already theirs. "Mom, this has gone too far," Danny began, his voice sharp, rehearsed. "You've shut us out, humiliated us. We're your family. We deserve an explanation." I stood with my arms folded. "I've given you 33,000 explanations, written in dollars. That's over. You've taken enough." Jessica's voice slithered into the room. "Maggie, don't make this harder than it has to be. Just sign the papers. A simple power of attorney. Danny will handle your finances until you get back on track." "Back on track," I laughed, bitter and raw. "You mean until you drain what's left?" Fisher opened his briefcase, sliding documents onto the table. "Mrs. Wilson, these arrangements are quite common. It prevents confusion, ensures your bills are paid, protects your interests." I leaned over, picked up the top paper, and without looking tossed it into the trash. "The only thing being protected here is your greed." Danny's jaw tightened. "Mom, please, we don't want this to get ugly. We love you. We're just worried." "Love?" My voice cracked, then sharpened. "Love doesn't exclude a mother from her only son's wedding. Love doesn't turn every conversation into a bill. Love doesn't bring a lawyer into a house to call her incompetent." Jessica's eyes glistened, but it was performance, not pain. "We thought you'd understand. You're making us look like villains. All we want is to take care of you." "Take care of me?" I snapped. "You've treated me like a bank account with legs, and now you want legal control to make it official. Well, I refuse." Fisher cleared his throat, trying to steady the crumbling facade. Mrs. Wilson, if you refuse to cooperate, your children have legal options. They can petition the court for guardianship. Judges often rule in favour of family when there's evidence of confusion. The word hit like lightning. Confusion. That was their weapon, their story. That I was an old woman slipping into madness, incapable of managing my life. I straightened, my hands no longer trembling. I have managed my finances flawlessly for decades. I raised Danny alone after Robert died. I worked, I saved, I sacrificed. If you think I'll hand over control to a manipulative daughter-in-law and a son too weak to stand up to her, you're the ones who are confused. The silence that followed was thick, broken only by the drum of rain. Danny finally stepped forward, anger radiating from him. Mom, if you keep this up, you'll end up alone. No one to call when you fall, no one to drive you to the hospital. You'll regret it. My heart clenched, but I forced the words out with clarity. I already am alone. Danny, the difference is now it's by choice, not by neglect. Jessica's mask slipped completely. You selfish old woman. Everything you have was supposed to be ours. You've wasted it on yourself, and for what? You'll die, and it'll all rot anyway. The venom in her tones sliced deeper than a knife. I felt something inside me harden into stone. Get out, I said, pointing to the door. Fisher tried one last time. Mrs. Wilson, I urge you to reconsider. Court proceedings are costly, exhausting. You don't want this fight. Oh, but I do, I answered, my voice steady, because for the first time the fight is mine. They left in a storm of slammed doors and muttered threats. I stood in the centre of my living room, drenched in silence, trembling not with fear but with adrenaline. I had faced them, denied them, refused to bend. For once I wasn't the one cowering, but the battle wasn't over. I knew it in my bones. The next morning a letter arrived by courier. Legal language sprawled across heavy paper, a formal notice of intent to pursue guardianship. They had wasted no time. The threats were real now, not just shouted in anger, but etched in ink, stamped with the authority of the law. I carried the letter to Tom Webber's office, my fingers gripping it like a weapon. He read it, his expression grim. Maggie, this is serious. They're claiming you're suffering from mental decline. They've listed witnesses, neighbours, even your pharmacist. They're building a case. My stomach turned. Witnesses? Who? Jessica, of course, a neighbour named Robert Davis, and William Green, the pharmacist. I gasped. Mr. Green, who had always been kind, who had chatted with me about vitamins and aspirin. Why would he? Tom raised a hand. He may have been misled. We'll find out, but this means we need to act fast. We'll gather documentation, evaluations, witnesses of our own. I sank into the chair, the weight pressing down on me. My own son wanted to drag me into court to declare me incompetent. All for money. Tom's voice softened. Maggie, I've seen this before. It's elder financial abuse. You are not alone. We will fight. That night, I sat at my kitchen table once more, but instead of writing checks or balancing transfers, I wrote names. Friends who could testify, neighbours who had seen my clarity, records I could provide. Every name, every document was a shield. I thought of Robert, of the vow I had made at his grave to protect our son. But now, to protect myself, I had to do the opposite. The realization broke me open, tears spilling onto the paper. Outside, headlights swept across the window. Danny's car. I froze, then peeked through the curtain. He sat there in the dark, engine idling, watching my house like a hunter. I stepped back, heart pounding, but then a strange calm washed over me. Let him watch. Let him see the lights on, the walls secure, the cameras blinking red. This was my fortress now. I whispered into the quiet as if Robert could hear me. They think I'm weak, but I'm stronger than they ever knew. The storm outside finally passed, but inside me another storm gathered, one I would carry into the courtroom, one that would not rest until I reclaimed not only my freedom, but my dignity. The war. War had begun, and this time I was ready. The morning the truth revealed itself began like any other, with me sipping lukewarm coffee at the kitchen table, the soft hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. But in my chest, unease throbbed like a second heartbeat. The letter of intent for guardianship had rattled me, and Tom's warnings echoed in my ears. They were desperate, and desperate people always escalated. I decided that day I needed proof. Proof of what Danny and Jessica had done. Evidence of their lies, their manipulations, their schemes. Proof that would stand in court. My first stop was the pharmacy. William Green, the pharmacist who had supposedly signed a statement about my erratic behaviour, greeted me with his usual warm smile. But when I mentioned the affidavit with his name, his face paled. "Mrs. Wilson, I didn't mean for it to be used like that," he stammered. "Used like what?" I pressed. He rubbed the back of his neck. "Jessica came in a few weeks ago, asking questions about your medications. She said she was worried you weren't taking proper care of yourself. I told her the truth, that you only buy vitamins and occasional aspirin, that you don't have any prescriptions. But she pushed me to sign a paper. She said it was for insurance. I thought it was harmless. The betrayal made my knees weak. She tricked you into signing something that paints me as unstable." His eyes filled with shame. "Yes, and I'll write a new statement, clarifying everything. I'll testify if I have to." Relief surged through me, tempered by anger, one piece of their case crumbling. Next was Robert Davis, the neighbour across the street. He was less cooperative. When Tom and I knocked, he sneered before we even spoke. "She's crazy," he muttered, arms crossed, installing cameras, yelling at her family. "It's not normal." I clenched my fists. "I installed cameras because my son and his wife broke into my home without permission. I yelled because they were trying to steal my life." "That's what a paranoid person would say," he shot back. His tone was dripping with contempt, as though my suffering amused him. I realized reason was useless. He wasn't misled like Mr. Green. He simply enjoyed the drama, and Jessica had fed him a story that matched his bitterness. Back home, I spread the documents across my dining table, the same table where Fisher had once poured through my life. Only this time, the evidence was mine. The ledger of $33,400, Mr. Green's new statement, bank records showing decades of perfect management, proof of my independence. As I worked, my phone buzzed again and again. Unknown numbers, voicemails laced with threats and guilt. I ignored them all. That evening, I found unexpected strength in the form of Helen Brooks, my neighbour who had become my closest ally. She brought me a cup of coffee and listened quietly as I explained everything, the affidavit, the witnesses, the lies. When I finished, she placed her hand over mine. "Maggie, you're not crazy. You're fighting for your life. And you're not alone. I'll testify. I've seen how clear you are, stronger than ever." Tears burned my eyes, but they weren't tears of weakness. They were tears of gratitude. For once, someone cared not because of my money, but because of me. The following week, Tom arranged for me to undergo a full psychological evaluation with Dr. Susan Moore, a specialist in elder competency. I sat in her office for 2 hours, answering questions, solving problems, recalling details of my life. At the end, she smiled kindly. "Mrs. Wilson, your results are not only normal, they're excellent. You are more than capable of managing your affairs. I'll prepare a report for the court." Proof solid and undeniable. Still, the pressure didn't stop. One night, as I pulled into my driveway, headlights flared behind me, Danny's car. He and Jessica stepped out, their faces tight with fury. "Mom, this is ridiculous," Danny snapped. "We're your family. You can't drag strangers into our lives, lawyers, doctors, neighbours. It's humiliating." I stepped out of my car slowly, keeping my voice calm. "What's humiliating is your attempt to declare me incompetent because I stopped paying your bills." Jessica's eyes narrowed. "You think these people will protect you? They don't love you, we do. We're the ones who will be here when you're old and sick." "You excluded me from your wedding," I said coldly. "You rifled through my papers. You called me confused. That's not love." Danny's voice cracked. "We had no choice. You cut us off. Do you know how hard it is for us? Do you know what you've done?" "Yes," I replied. "I've forced you to stand on your own feet." Jessica's voice turned venomous. "We'll take everything in court. The house, the accounts. You won't be able to stop us." "Then I'll see you there," I answered, my voice steady. The next morning I met Tom with all the gathered evidence. He organised it into neat folders. Mr. Green's correction, Dr. Moore's evaluation, my financial records, Helen's testimony. Piece by piece, the truth had taken shape. "This is good," Tom said, satisfaction in his tone. "They underestimated you, Maggie. They thought they could scare you, confuse you, but what we have here is a case of elder financial abuse, and we'll expose it." I nodded, resolve flooding me. For years I had been the woman who gave and gave, hoping love could be bought. Now I was the woman who would defend her dignity, even against her own son. That night, I stood at the window, staring at the darkened street. I saw their car pass slowly, headlights sweeping across my house. They were watching me, circling like predators. But instead of fear, I felt something else rise inside me. Determination. They wanted to prove I was weak. Instead, I would prove I was stronger than they ever imagined. The storm of betrayal had stripped me bare, but in its wake it left behind something indestructible. Truth. And armed with truth, I was ready for the war ahead. Because this wasn't just about money anymore. It was about survival. It was about dignity. It was about finally reclaiming the life I had spent decades giving away. And I swore to myself, under the watchful eyes of the night, that I would not lose. The day of confrontation came sooner than I expected. A court date had been set, but Danny and Jessica couldn't wait for the official stage. They arrived at my house with a fury that shook the walls. I saw them on the camera first. Jessica, in a black coat, her expression cold and sharp. Danny pacing like a man already cornered. Behind them came Fisher, briefcase in hand, ready to finish what he had started. I didn't want to let them in, but Tom had advised me to face them directly when possible. So I opened the door, standing firm in the threshold. "What do you want?" I asked. Danny's voice trembled with a mixture of anger and desperation. "Mom, this madness has to stop. You're tearing the family apart. Just sign the damn papers." Jessica's tone was colder, her words carefully measured. "You've embarrassed us in front of everyone. Lawyers, neighbours, even social workers. You've turned this into a circus. If you had just trusted us, none of this would be happening." I folded my arms. "Trusted you? You lied to me, excluded me, tricked people into signing statements against me. You don't want my trust. You want my control." Fisher stepped forward, his voice smooth, professional. "Mrs. Wilson, this hostility isn't helping anyone. Your children are concerned. The court will look more kindly on cooperation than defiance. If you sign a limited power of attorney, we can end this quietly." I laughed bitterly. "Quietly, so you can bleed me dry behind closed doors?" "No. If we go to court, at least the lies will be exposed under oath." Jessica's mask cracked, fury flashing in her eyes. "You ungrateful old woman. After everything we've done for you," my temper flared. "Everything you've done for me? I paid your rent for 3 years. I fed you, clothed you, covered your emergencies, bought your furniture, even helped with your wedding dress. $33,000. Jessica, what exactly have you done for me?" The silence that followed was sharp as broken glass. Danny shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting to the floor. Fisher cleared his throat, but Jessica couldn't stop herself. "You were supposed to," she shouted. "That's your job. Parents take care of their children. You had money sitting there, wasting away. Why shouldn't it go to us?" The words landed like a slap. At last, the truth was bare. It wasn't about love, about family, about concern. It was about entitlement. To her, my life's work, my sacrifices, my savings, they were hers by right. I stepped closer, my voice low but searing. "You don't want a mother. You want a bank, and I am done being your ATM." Danny finally looked up, his face torn between shame and rage. "Mom, if you go through with this, you'll regret it. We'll make sure of it." For the first time, I felt no fear, only clarity. "Then I'll see you in court." They stormed out, Fisher snapping his briefcase shut, Jessica muttering curses under her breath, Danny slamming the door so hard the pictures rattled on the wall. I stood alone in the silence that followed, my heart racing, but a strange calm settling in. I had faced them, stripped of illusions, and they had revealed their true selves without even realizing it. The next day Tom came by, and I told him everything. His face hardened as I recounted Jessica's outburst. "Perfect," he said, tapping his pen against his notepad. "That's exactly the kind of admission we need. Entitlement, not concern. If they repeat that in court, or if we can show testimony that they said it, we'll dismantle their case." I nodded, exhaustion tugging at me, but also pride. For once, my words had weight. For once, I wasn't silent. That evening, Helen knocked on my door. She brought soup, sat with me at the table, and listened as I poured out every detail. When I finished, she shook her head. "They're drowning, Maggie, and instead of learning to swim, they're trying to drag you under with them." Her words cut through me, simple but true. I realized then that my fight wasn't just against Danny and Jessica. It was against the part of myself that still clung to the hope of saving them. That part had to die for me to live. The following week, the escalation grew sharper. Anonymous letters slipped under my door, warning me to do the right thing or face the consequences. My phone lit up with calls at all hours. Once I caught sight of Jessica's car idling at the end of the street. Headlights dimmed, as if she were watching, waiting, but fear no longer owned me. Each act of intimidation became another stone in the wall I was building around my resolve. They were desperate. I was determined. One night I dreamed of Robert. In the dream he stood in the doorway of our old bedroom, smiling the way he had before the sickness hollowed him out. "Stand tall, Maggie," he said softly. "Don't let them take what we built." When I woke, my pillow was wet with tears, but my spirit felt fortified. The next morning I dressed in my best suit, the one I hadn't worn since Robert's funeral. I looked in the mirror at the woman staring back, wrinkled, yes, weary, yes, but fierce, unbreakable. "This is my life," I whispered, "and I will not surrender it." At that moment, I knew the truth was on my side. They could twist stories, bribe neighbours, manipulate witnesses, but in the end, the facts were mine. The ledger of sacrifices, the testimonies of those who saw my clarity, the professional evaluation of my mind. Piece by piece, the case against me was crumbling. When Tom called later that day, his voice was steady. "Maggie, we're ready. Whatever they throw at us, we'll counter. You're not just defending yourself, you're setting a precedent. Others will see that you can say no, that you can fight back." I hung up the phone and sat at the kitchen table, the same place where I'd once written checks to cover Danny's rent, Jessica's dresses, their endless demands. But now, the table was covered in folders of evidence, testimonies, proof of their lies. And for the first time in years, I felt not like a provider, not like a victim, but like a warrior preparing for battle. The storm was coming, the trial looming ahead. But I no longer feared it, because I had seen the truth with my own eyes, heard it from their own mouths, and I knew finally that the power was mine. The next time Danny and Jessica tried to call me confused, the world would see who was truly blind, and the moment of judgment would belong to me. I woke before dawn on the day I resolved to fight back. The house was silent, wrapped in the dim blue of early morning, and for once the silence didn't feel oppressive. It felt like a beginning. I brewed coffee, dressed in my best navy suit, and gathered the folders spread across the dining table. Inside them was everything. Bank statements, letters, Dr. Moore's evaluation, Mr. Green's testimony, even Helen's written account of my clarity. Each page was armour, each signature a weapon. When Tom arrived, he found me already standing at the door, files clutched in my hands. "You look ready for war," he said. "I am," I replied, "and I intend to win." The courthouse loomed grey and imposing, its steps slick with morning rain. My stomach churned as I climbed, but my spine stayed straight. Inside, the air was heavy with tension. Danny and Jessica were already there, seated with Fisher. Danny wore a new suit, his tie crooked, his face pale but set. Jessica was draped in black, as if she were attending a funeral. Perhaps she thought she was. Our eyes met across the hallway. Danny looked away. Jessica held my gaze with an icy smile, daring me to falter. But I didn't. In the courtroom, Judge Miller presided, his expression stern but not unkind. He called the case Wilson v. Wilson. The irony stung. My own name turned into a weapon against me. Fisher began, his voice polished and solemn. "Your Honour, my clients are here today because they are deeply concerned about their mother's well-being. Mrs. Wilson has shown erratic behaviour, cancelling long-standing financial support without explanation, installing unnecessary security systems, isolating herself under the influence of outsiders. We believe she is suffering from cognitive decline and requires guardianship." His words were knives, cutting me into a caricature of a frail, paranoid old woman. I sat still, gripping the edge of the table, waiting for my chance. Jessica was the first witness. Her performance was flawless, tears glistening on cue. "Maggie has always been like a second mother to me," she sobbed. "But lately she's changed. She's angry, paranoid, and she refuses to let us help. We just want to protect her." Tom stood for the cross-examination, his tone steady. "Mrs. Carter, when was the last time you called my client without asking for money?" Jessica blinked, faltered. "We always talked about many things." "A date, please," Tom pressed. "I don't recall." "Is it true you and your husband were married without inviting her?" "It was a small ceremony. Is it also true you told her you invited only special people?" Colour drained from her face. Those words were taken out of context. Tom leaned forward. What context makes it acceptable to tell your mother-in-law she is not special? She sputtered, but no answer came. The crack in her mask widened. Danny was next. He swore to tell the truth, then spoke lies that pierced deeper than any dagger. Mom has always been generous, but now she's irrational. She won't answer our calls, won't help us. We believe she's being manipulated by others who don't care about her. Tom rose again. Mr. Wilson, how much money have you received from your mother in the last 3 years? Danny shifted. I don't know the exact amount. Does $33,400 sound right? His throat bobbed. Maybe. She's always helped. How many times have you visited her without asking for money? Silence. Is it true you and your wife entered her home without permission and went through her private documents? We were worried about her. Is it true you brought a lawyer to pressure her into signing a power of attorney? Danny's face twisted. We wanted to help manage her finances. Tom's voice sharpened. You are 35 years old. Do you require your 71-year-old mother to pay your rent? Danny's silence was deafening. Fisher tried to repair the damage with Robert Davis, the neighbour. Davis took the stand, grumbling about my cameras and strange behaviour. But under questioning, he admitted he had never spoken to me directly, that his observations were only assumptions. His credibility crumbled like sand. Then came Dr. Lehman, who claimed my refusal of an evaluation was proof of decline. But Tom countered with Dr. Moore's report detailing my excellent cognitive health. Lehman's authority shrank in the face of hard evidence. Finally, it was my turn. I walked to the witness stand with deliberate steps, every eye on me. My hands trembled, but my voice was steady. I told my story, the sacrifices, the rent, the groceries, the furniture, the endless requests. I spoke of the humiliation of being excluded from the wedding, of being told I wasn't special. I described the night they invaded my home, the threats, the lies, the attempt to strip me of autonomy. Why did you stop supporting your son and daughter-in-law? Tom asked gently. Because I finally understood it wasn't love, I said, my voice rising with conviction. It was a transaction. My money was welcome, but I was not. They didn't want a mother. They wanted a resource, and I am no longer willing to be used. Fisher's cross-examination tried to paint me as confused, but every question I answered with precision. I recited dates, amounts, names. I described my daily routines, my independence, my friendships. The more he pressed, the clearer I became. When I returned to my seat, Helen gave me a small nod from the gallery. Strength pulsed through me. Closing arguments came. Fisher insisted I was manipulated, fragile, paranoid. Tom's rebuttal cut like a blade. Your Honour, this is not the case of a confused old woman. This is the case of a mother who has been exploited, who has given $33,000 to 2 capable adults, who has endured humiliation, invasion and threats. Her only so-called decline is that she finally said no. The courtroom fell into silence as Judge Miller leaned forward. I will take time to deliberate, he said. This decision cannot be rushed. 2 hours later we reconvened. The judge's expression was solemn, but his words were clear. After reviewing the evidence, it is obvious to this court that Mrs. Margaret Wilson is fully competent. Professional evaluations confirm her cognitive health. Her financial choices, though painful to her family, are rational and within her right. This petition for guardianship is denied. The weight lifted from my chest so suddenly I almost collapsed. Danny's face flushed red. Jessica's twisted into a mask of fury. Fisher packed his briefcase with tight lips. I had won. The court had not only protected my rights, it had restored my dignity. As I stepped out of the courthouse, rain fell again, but this time it felt like baptism, washing away years of sacrifice and sorrow. Tom walked beside me, steady as always, but I barely heard his words. All I could feel was the truth ringing in my bones. I was free. And for the first time in decades, the life ahead was mine to claim. I thought the worst was behind me after Judge Miller denied their petition. For days I moved through my house lighter than air, savouring the silence that no longer felt threatening. I cooked meals just for myself, went for walks in the park, even spent an afternoon painting flowers on a canvas I had neglected for years. It felt like reclaiming pieces of myself that had been buried under bills and obligations. But peace has a way of lulling you into false security. The storm wasn't over. It was only gathering strength. One morning, as sunlight streamed through my kitchen window, a sharp knock rattled the front door. I checked the camera. A young woman stood on the porch, well-dressed, her hair in a neat bun, holding a folder. She looked official, the kind of visitor who never brings good news. I opened the door a crack. "Yes? Mrs. Wilson?" she asked, her voice clipped, professional. "I'm a social investigator with the Office of Senior Services. My name is Karen Schmidt. We've received a report that you may be in an at-risk situation. I need to conduct a wellness check." My stomach dropped. Danny and Jessica had escalated again. They hadn't just tried to use lawyers, they'd called in the government. "May I see your ID?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. She flashed it, official and genuine. I let her in, though every nerve screamed against it. She sat on my sofa, opened her folder, and began reading in a flat tone. "We've been informed you've shown significant changes in your financial behaviour, including abruptly cutting off family support. You've also installed security systems, isolated yourself from loved ones, and refused medical advice. These are potential signs of confusion or decline." The words were familiar, Jessica's words carefully repackaged. My blood boiled. "I want my lawyer here before I answer anything," I said firmly. "This isn't a legal interrogation," she replied. "It's a wellness check, if you have nothing to hide." That phrase ignited fury. If I have nothing to hide, that's what abusers say before they strip you of your rights. I will not answer without my lawyer. I called Tom. Within 20 minutes, he walked in, his presence grounding me. He greeted Karen politely but firmly. "Do you have a court order?" She hesitated. "No, but we received reports from concerned family members." Tom placed a folder on the table with deliberate weight. "Those same family members tricked a pharmacist into signing false statements, broke into my client's home and tried to coerce her into giving up control of her finances. We have evidence of $33,400 taken over 3 years. That's not concern. That's exploitation." Karen flipped through the documents, her professional mask slipping as unease crept across her face. She looked at me, then back at Tom. Finally, she closed her folder. "Mrs. Wilson, I see no indication that you're at risk. I'll close this case." When she left, I collapsed into a chair, my body shaking. Relief washed over me, but so did something darker, fear. They weren't going to stop. If the law couldn't hand me over to them, they would find another way. That night, I barely slept. I dreamed of Jessica's voice whispering special people in my ear, of Danny's eyes turned cold and unrecognizable. I woke drenched in sweat, heart pounding. The next morning, I looked at myself in the mirror. Wrinkles lined my face, my hair streaked with grey, but behind my eyes was a steel they hadn't counted on. They wanted me weak, confused, broken, but every attempt to destroy me only sharpened my resolve. Still, a question haunted me. How far would they go? Later that week, Helen came by with coffee. We sat in the garden, the air crisp, the flowers swaying in the breeze. I told her everything about the social worker, about the lies Jessica had spun. Helen listened silently, then shook her head. "Maggie, they won't give up until they take what they think is theirs," she said. "You need to be ready, not just for court, for anything." Her words chilled me, because deep down, I already knew the truth. Danny and Jessica had crossed every line of decency. If the law failed them, if manipulation failed them, there was only one path left. They would come for me again. And next time, it might not be with papers or investigators. It might be with something darker. I stared at the horizon, the sky streaked red with sunset, and whispered to myself, "Be ready." The warning signs came quickly after the social worker's visit was closed. At first, it was small things, strange cars idling near my street, shadows of figures walking past my house at odd hours. I told myself it was paranoia, but then one night, the motion sensors on my cameras caught Danny standing in the yard, his face half hidden by the hood of his sweatshirt. He didn't ring the bell, didn't knock, just stared into the lens of the camera for a long, chilling minute before walking away. The next morning, an envelope lay on my porch. Inside was a single piece of paper with words scrawled in Danny's handwriting. "This isn't over. You owe us. One way or another, we'll get what's ours." I held the note in trembling hands, a cocktail of rage and heartbreak flooding me. My son, my only child, was threatening me like a stranger. I called Tom immediately. He came that afternoon, read the note, and sighed. "This is intimidation, Maggie. We'll add it to the case file, but you need more protection." Protection. The word echoed in my mind. I thought of Robert, of how he used to say that safety was something you built for yourself, not something you waited for. That evening, I called a locksmith and upgraded every lock again, even the ones Ethan had installed. I added floodlights, reinforced doors, and carried pepper spray in my purse. It felt strange, becoming a fortress against the very people who should have been my shelter. But the real turning point came from the documents Tom uncovered. He had requested financial records connected to Jessica. What he found made my blood run cold. Hidden among her transactions was a separate account, one Danny didn't know about. Transfers from my money, amounts I thought had gone to their rent or bills, had been funneled into this account. Jessica had been hoarding it, building a secret stash while pleading poverty. Tom laid the papers on my table, his expression grim. "She's been saving it under her maiden name. Over $12,000. Your money, Maggie, not spent on necessities, hoarded." I stared at the numbers, bile rising in my throat. Every dollar represented a sacrifice I had made. Meals skipped, repairs postponed, nights spent worrying. All of it tucked away in her secret account. The betrayal was almost too much to bear. "She never needed it," I whispered. All those tears, all those phone calls, lies. She was stockpiling while I starved myself for them. Tom nodded. "This changes everything. If they try to push for guardianship again, we'll expose this. And if they escalate further, we'll take this evidence to the police for financial fraud." That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the hidden account. It was the final proof that love had never been part of the equation. Jessica hadn't just used me, she had plotted, strategized, prepared for a future where I was nothing more than a bank drained dry. I sat at the table, staring at the ledger I had written weeks before, $33,400. But now I saw the truth. It wasn't generosity, it was theft disguised as love. Helen came by the next day and I showed her the documents. Her face hardened. "They'll never stop, Maggie. You've given them more than money. You gave them control. And now that you've taken it back, they'll claw at you until they bleed." I swallowed hard. "Then I'll make sure the bleeding isn't mine." In that moment, something inside me shifted. I was no longer just defending myself. I was preparing to strike back. The days of silence, of tears, of waiting for them to make the next move were over. That evening, I sat in my living room with Tom and Helen, the documents spread out before us. "What now?" I asked. Tom leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "Now we go on offense. We file for a restraining order. We document every threat, every visit, every lie, and we use that hidden account to prove their greed. The judge won't see a confused old woman. He'll see a mother exploited and children who crossed into criminal territory." Helen touched my hand, her grip steady. "You're not alone anymore, Maggie. This time, when they come for you, they'll find all of us standing in the way." For the first time in months, I felt something stronger than fear. It was resolve, hot and unyielding. Danny and Jessica thought they could break me with threats, with lies, with shadows lurking outside my home. But I wasn't the same woman who had written checks in silence, hoping for scraps of affection. I was ready, and when the next battle came, I wouldn't just defend my life. I would fight to reclaim every piece of it they had stolen. The day of the trial felt like walking into the heart of a storm. I arrived at the courthouse with Tom by my side, a folder clutched so tightly in my hands that the edges bent under my grip. My heart pounded, but my steps were steady. This wasn't just a hearing. It was the battle for my freedom, my dignity, my very identity. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with tension. Danny sat stiffly in a dark suit, his jaw tight, his eyes darting anywhere but toward me. Jessica was next to him, her expression carefully composed, but her hands twisted the strap of her purse again and again. Fisher stood tall between them, his confidence radiating like a shield. Judge Miller entered, and the room fell silent. "We are here to hear arguments in the case of Wilson v. Wilson. The petitioners allege that Margaret Wilson is unable to manage her affairs. We will review evidence and testimony before ruling." Fisher began, his voice smooth. "Your Honour, my clients have only ever acted out of love and concern. Their mother has shown signs of decline, paranoia and erratic behaviour. She cut off financial support abruptly, isolated herself, and is under the influence of outsiders. They fear for her well-being. Tom rose calmly when it was his turn. Your Honour, this is not concern. This is exploitation. Over 3 years, Mrs. Wilson gave her son and daughter-in-law $33,400. She paid rent, groceries, furniture, medical bills. When she finally said no, they responded with threats, lies, and manipulation. This case is not about mental decline, it is about greed. The witnesses paraded forward. Jessica wept on cue, insisting I had become hostile and unstable. Danny claimed I was irrational, that I had always relied on him. But under Tom's cross-examination, their stories cracked. Neither could remember a time they called me without asking for money. Both admitted they excluded me from their wedding. Their love, when stripped bare, revealed itself as entitlement. Then Tom presented the evidence of Jessica's hidden account. $12,000 siphoned from the money I had given them, stashed away under her maiden name. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Jessica's face turned white. Danny's head dropped into his hands. Fisher scrambled, but the damage was done. Helen testified next, her voice clear and steady. I've seen Maggie every day. She is sharp, independent, and stronger than many women half her age. The only confusion here is the confusion created by those trying to manipulate her. Finally, Dr. Moore took the stand. She outlined my evaluation in precise detail, my memory, reasoning, and judgment all above average. Mrs. Wilson is entirely competent to manage her affairs, she concluded. When it was my turn, I stood in the witness box, every eye on me. Your Honour, I said, my voice trembling but loud, I am not perfect, but I am not incompetent. I worked 40 years, raised my son alone, and managed my finances without fail. I gave until I had nothing left, and when I finally said no, my son and his wife tried to strip me of my freedom. That is not love. That is theft in disguise. The silence in the courtroom was heavy, broken only by the judge's pen scratching against paper. When all was said, Judge Miller leaned forward. His eyes were stern, his voice steady. Having reviewed all evidence and testimony, this court finds no grounds to declare Margaret Wilson incompetent. On the contrary, the evidence shows she has been the victim of financial exploitation. The petition for guardianship is denied. The words struck like sunlight breaking through clouds. I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Danny's shoulders slumped. Jessica's eyes burned with rage. Fisher packed his papers with forced composure. But I no longer looked at them. My gaze stayed fixed on the judge, on the truth he had affirmed. I was competent, I was free, and for the first time in years the law stood on my side. As I left the courtroom, rain pattered softly outside, washing the steps clean, and in that rain I felt something new settle in my bones, not just victory, but vindication. The days after the verdict felt like stepping into a new world. For the first time in years I woke without dread pressing against my chest. The phone still rang, unknown numbers, desperate voicemails, but I no longer trembled at the sound. I pressed delete without listening. Their words no longer held power. I began to rebuild a life that had been neglected for too long. I changed the locks again, installed brighter lights along the porch, and walked freely through my home without the shadow of fear. I even opened a new account at a different bank, one Danny and Jessica would never find, and for the first time my money felt safe. Mine. But it wasn't just security I sought. It was joy. I visited a beauty salon, let Cindy trim my hair, and when she spun the chair around, I barely recognized the woman in the mirror. Lighter, freer, even radiant. I met Helen for coffee at the cafe down the street. We laughed about small things, shared stories that had nothing to do with courtrooms or betrayals. For once, I was part of the world again, not a prisoner of obligation. One afternoon, I drove to the cemetery with fresh flowers for Robert's grave. I sat in the grass and spoke softly, as if he could hear me. I kept my promise, I whispered. I raised our son. I gave him everything I could, but now I'm learning to give to myself. The wind stirred the leaves, and I felt an odd peace, as though Robert approved. In the evenings, I painted. Colours flowed onto the canvas, bright, unapologetic, alive. I joined a community art class where strangers became companions, people who saw me not as a resource, but as a person with stories, with laughter, with worth. Yet even in freedom the question lingered, should I forgive? Danny was my child, flesh of my flesh, the boy who once clutched my hand at the park. But every memory of that boy clashed with the man who had stood in court to declare me unfit. Some nights, guilt gnawed at me, whispering that mothers should forgive anything. Other nights I thought of Jessica's sneer, the venom in her words, and the guilt hardened into resolve. Helen posed the question directly one evening. We were sitting on her porch, watching the sunset stain the sky with fire. "Will you forgive them, Maggie?" she asked. I sipped my tea, let the silence stretch. "I don't know. Forgiveness feels like giving them another piece of me, and I've given enough," she nodded. "Then maybe forgiveness isn't for them. Maybe it's for you to let go." Her words stayed with me. Perhaps one day I would forgive, not to open the door again, but to close it gently in my heart. For now, I chose something simpler, to live. I planned a trip to Europe, a dream Robert and I had shared, but never realized. I signed up for volunteer work at a shelter, eager to give in a way that healed instead of drained. The past still haunted me, but it no longer defined me. The wounds were deep, but scars are proof of survival. And every morning I woke now, the first thought in my mind was not fear or duty, but possibility. Would I forgive? Would I ever let Danny back into my life? I didn't know. But as I watched the sun rise over a sky unchained, I understood one thing with certainty: the rest of my life belonged to me. My name is Mae Wilson. I am 71 years old, and after decades of giving everything to others, I have finally learned the most important truth of all. The only person I am truly responsible for loving and protecting is myself. I thought motherhood meant endless sacrifice, that if I poured out every dollar and every ounce of energy, love would follow in return. But love built on money is not love at all. It is a contract written in disappearing ink. When I finally said no, my son and his wife tried to erase me, to declare me incompetent, to strip me of dignity. They failed, and in their failure, I found freedom. Now each morning I wake without chains. I travel, I paint, I laugh with friends who see me as a woman, not a wallet. The silence of my home is no longer heavy. It is precious. It is mine. But I will not pretend the wounds are gone. At night I still wonder, should I forgive Danny? Should I open my door again if he comes back, humbled, asking for love instead of money? Or should I protect the walls I've built, even if it means closing the door forever? That, dear listener, is the question I leave with you. If you were in my place, betrayed, humiliated, but still bound by blood, what would you do? Would you forgive, or would you cut ties once and for all? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective matters, and I want to hear it. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and support more stories like mine. Because sometimes survival isn't just about staying alive. It's about choosing whose voice you let into your heart.